You know me as the host of the Too Busy to Eat show, but I'm also founder and CEO of Too Busy to Eat, the protein bar company. I make what I feel is the healthiest and best tasting protein bar on the market. So now it developed from my own frustration of not being able to find a bar that tasted good and that was extremely healthy, that I could have maybe multiple times a day if I was really busy, or I could feed my kids and not feel guilty about what they ate. So I created this bar with grass-fed whey protein, no more than 3 grams of sugar, which is all naturally occurring, and it's gluten-free, non-GMO, the list goes on. So don't take my word for it. I want you to try them. And I want to give you incentive to try them. So I'm going to give you 20% off your first order. You can get a sample bag of bars, or you can get a whole box, whatever you want. Go to my website, toobusytoeat.com. Not hard to remember. Show, the company. And enter the promo code TBTE show. TBTE show. Actually, it's a discount box when you check out, and you get 20% off your first order, no matter how small or large. So go to the website now, try them out, and then let me know what you think. Welcome to the Too Busy to Eat show. Today you are in for a treat. We have Tawnee Prazak-Gibson on the show with us today. She is from Endurance Planet. She has that podcast, Endurance Planet, enduranceplanet.com. You have lifepostcollection.com. You have coachtawny.com. And that's the best way to reach her, coachtawny.com. But her story is really powerful. The information she's gained over the years through all her experiences is really powerful. So get ready to have some fun. And let's get to Coach Tawnee now. Well, Tawnee, I'm so excited to have you on the show. It's been great just to talk to you briefly before, but thanks for taking the time to be on the Too Busy to Eat show.
I am not too busy to eat ever, just for the record there. But I'm so honored to be on. It's always refreshing to be on the other side of things, since I do plenty of interviewing myself.
Yes, you are. You do a lot of that. You're on the flip side quite often. How often do this is sort of a side note, not really, but how often do the podcasts and everything you do, how often are you doing that?
Well, it's funny because I actually started in print journalism before the podcast. So I was interviewing people for basically this point as long as I can remember in college. But with podcasting, there's been times where we were pushing out 3 shows a week.
Right.
That gets intense, especially a lot of our shows are pretty in depth. So there's a lot of research on my end, whether it's getting to know the guest or the subject at hand kind of thing. And now it tends to be 1 to 2 shows a week. We're kind of gearing more toward 1 show a week because we're doing more projects on the side, like our Life Post Collective Inner Circle community. So,
right.
Plus, we just, how it is. Like, podcasts are booming right now.
Yeah.
And I feel like if we're releasing too many shows, some of those might get lost because people just don't have time to listen to all the podcasts, because there's just so many good ones out there to listen to.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's I would say it's totally flooded, but there's so many, like you said, so many to choose from. If you're putting out 3, 4 and your audience and your fans are trying to keep up, sometimes it gets too overwhelming for people. Yeah. That's great. Now, so I gave a brief intro before about you, but is there anything else you can give us a little bit more? Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey to where you got from where you were? I mean, there's a lot. I read.
I know.
So our 25-minute interview could take, we could take that whole thing just talking about your journey, because you've had some interesting twists and turns in your life.
Yeah.
But why don't you give us a summary of what got you to where you are?
I think I'm getting better at telling the short version of it. But seriously, I could totally fill the whole hour with it.
Absolutely.
So, it's funny, like when I was doing all these things in the process, never was it on my mind like that this would lead me to where I'm at now, being an expert in all those areas and helping other people who are kind of going through the same struggles. And I think that's how a lot of us, as we grow, we find our passions through our own experiences. And thankfully, on the side, I was already getting, the right kind of educations to actually make a legit career out of a lot of it. But, it all kind of started, when I got out of high school into college, I gained the freshman 15. I'd always been an athlete my whole life. I had always been fit. And then I took a break and I just decided to do my own thing, including lots of eating and drinking. And before you know it, you blow up. Well, I'm also kind of that perfectionist, type A, obsessive OCD person. And circumstances led me to lose a little weight over a holiday break. I got my tonsils out and wasn't eating that much. And it kind of snowballed. It turned into an eating disorder, sadly.
Oh,
And
gosh.
so
No.
within a couple months, I had dropped dozens of pounds. Like it was crazy. And I didn't even really realize it in the process, but by around like spring break of the following semester, I had just kind of withered away. And you don't really know you're in it until you're like, holy crap.
Yeah.
And it actually was my parents. I went home to visit them and they were like, oh my gosh, we got to, what happened to our daughter? We got to step in and do something about this. And thankfully I had a good head on my shoulders where I was able to recognize what I had gotten myself into. And so we actually made a pretty quick recovery for me. I did more like family home therapy sort of stuff. I never had to go to a center for treatment or anything. I just really was like, okay, I don't want to be like this. Well, let's figure this out. That said, I broke away from the worst of the eating disorder, in this case, anorexia.
Okay.
But the behaviors and the habits and all my little things stuck with me for a long, long time. In fact, it was even just last year that I finally had a really interesting, I went through this like kind of cathartic experience where I finally put, I think, eating disorder stuff to bed, to rest once and for all. So it hung on with me for a long time. So after I graduated from college, I was ready to get back into organized sport. I was missing it, and this time I really was geared toward individual sports and triathlon and running, my thing, especially triathlon. And I'll never forget the day I did my first triathlon. It was July 2007, and that was like the best day of my life. I said to myself, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to be involved in this in some capacity for the rest of my life. And I just went with it. And I raced hard. I raced a lot. I ended up, I'm genetically kind of built to be good at endurance sports. I even recently got my 23andMe, and sure enough, it confirms what I was already knowing.
Yes. That's great.
And I was racing like 10 to 12 times a year. I was on the podium a lot, loved it. But meanwhile, probably not having the best practice toward nourishing myself for sport. I was eating, and there was one level where triathlon actually did help me develop a healthier relationship with food, because food was fuel. Like you needed food in order to perform and be strong and be an athlete. Right. But it was still a disordered mentality, I think. I was kind of using all the training as an excuse to eat as much as I was. So it wasn't genuine in that sense. Okay. Yeah. And when you're pushing that hard, when your energy availability is low, even if you think you're eating enough, things happen. And for me, my hormones tanked. Like, with the anorexia background, then into hardcore triathlon, my hormones were in a postmenopausal range.
Oh gosh,
in my mid 20s. Right. And me again, kind of like the same thing when I went through the anorexia, eventually got to the point where I don't want to live like this. I love sports so much, but I know I'm killing myself right now. Maybe not literally, but what I'm doing is completely wrecking my health. It's this whole idea like fit but unhealthy. And I was the epitome of that. And eventually race performances started to tank after, again, like being a consistent podium athlete and stuff, qualifying for 70.3 World Championships and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I decided to put it into it and just say, you know what, let's put the racing to bed for a while and let's focus on getting healthy. Right. And that just, that's been over 3 years into that process. And it's just been, it's that next chapter of my life of another passion and figuring out now how to sort of bridge the two, like how to still be a healthy athlete, perform well, and not let a lot of these things control you. So, from the ground up, without using conventional medicine, using more of the functional holistic approach, I regained all my hormones.
Oh, nice.
Like regained fertility, like fix my gut issues, like all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And it was hard work. But I think that same dedication that I took to training as an athlete, I've changed that focus into repairing my health. And it took a long time with setbacks along the way, but it worked.
Yeah.
So,
that's
those two things, that journey, hopefully that wasn't too long, but
no, that's great.
To where I'm at now. And it's a beautiful life right now. I feel like I have a lot figured out.
Right. No, that's a great summary of a pretty fascinating journey that kind of really shaped you. I mean, shaped what you do, shaped your passions. And I mean, it's definitely your all in. And so that to me, like you're all in triathlons, you're all into figuring out your nutrition and what's going on with your body. And that's a great thing for people that listen to your podcast, people that get in your communities. I mean, you have so much to share with them because you have so many experiences. You lived through it all.
Well, what's funny too is that a lot of people out there just want to highlight the athletes who are winning championship races, qualifying for, all that. Whereas there's this whole other population of athletes who are like me, where, you realize you're fit but unhealthy, and hormones, whether you're a guy or a girl, hormones could be all over the place or tanked.
Right.
Your gut is a wreck. And I'm really gearing my work in life now to helping that population of athletes that sometimes other coaches, even if they're coaching an athlete like that, they have no idea that in the background, this person is suffering,
Yeah, right. And that you've been through it. So that makes you a perfect person to help that person in need. Yeah. That's so now you, 2000, I read in your story and in 2000, this year, actually, you had another kind of, something happened earlier last year. I mean, this year, I'm sorry, that, and you've worked through that too. Is that another step towards where you're going?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So, I think one of the reasons why it took me potentially a little bit longer to kind of get back to good health, because let's face it, I'm an athlete at heart, and it was hard for me to just hang it up completely. So, 2014, 15, I was still working out a lot. But I had scaled back tremendously on racing. But in 2015, I used a very healthy approach, the MAF method, developed by Dr. Phil Maffetone, who is one of my friends, colleagues, mentors. I used his approach completely. I had dabbled with it before, but in the midst of another type of training plan, I stuck to just MAF and actually used that to qualify for the Boston Marathon in 2015 while I was still kind of, doing the health stuff and all that. And then, so obviously this year would be the time that I was to race Boston. Well, I think I started getting a little aggressive and extreme with my lifestyle again at the end of 2015, had a bit of a setback. Also kind of had some random freak things. I got it's kind of complicated. I got a bout of the flu with salmonella.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
And so my body already being sensitive, vulnerable, and having had this pretty in-depth history, it actually triggered an autoimmune condition. Which I didn't know for about a month. But in January of this year, I was getting really weird symptoms, namely my hands were really swollen. I had just gotten engaged in 2015 and I couldn't wear the rings, which made no sense to me.
Right.
My weight hadn't changed, but my hands were puffy and I was getting weird stuff. And I knew enough to go down that road of autoimmunity and get tested for that. And sure enough, it came back positive. And it was why me? I've already been through all this. What the hell? Come on, can I just get a free break? But, it was an example where I got a little, like I said, I got a little greedy at the end of 2015, combined with some other things, plus the history. And autoimmunity triggers, actually, autoimmunity is way more common in today's world than we even know, but a lot of people may not even realize it. I'm very in tune with my body. So I took these little symptoms and I didn't let them just get out of hand. I did something about it. But it was a random, it's a lot of variables that go into triggering it. And so for me, it's okay, well, let's figure out the things that triggered it and undo all that if we can.
Right.
And I really, again, I hit it from all directions. I actually found out I had 2 infected root canals in my mouth that had been there since high school. And through my functional practitioners, got the recommendations to remove those, which it's funny because I've talked about that on Endurance Planet. And it's been a controversial topic, if you will, because some people came out and completely disagreed with my decision to get those teeth removed, saying that that's ridiculous. But, let's face it, I got those 2 teeth removed and within a week, all my symptoms started clearing up.
That's awesome.
So I think that there was these underlying infections in my body and that I just needed to get rid of them. And at this point, I've put the autoimmunity in remission, and it's been that way for a handful of months.
That's awesome.
So I know that I'm always going to be a person that would be susceptible to triggering that again. But if I live smartly and know my limits with stuff, whether that's exercise, diet, or whatever, or keeping gut health in check, then I think I'm good to go.
Yeah. Well, it's too bad you had to go through it again, but another thing you can help people through. I mean,
I know. Well, because I did the autoimmune paleo diet for a month, and if you're on kind of a paleo regimen as it is, that can be somewhat restrictive for some people. For me, it just feels natural to eat that way because I feel awesome when I eat that way. When you do autoimmune paleo, now you're talking about removing eggs, nuts, chocolate, coffee, nightshades. What else? I can't even think. Of course, gluten, dairy, soy. And it was hard. I had to get really creative with what to eat for breakfast other than eggs. have for my nightly treat other than dark chocolate, Don't even bother with a glass of wine and coffee. I kind of snuck in like a little bit of coffee. And thankfully that wasn't a trigger for me. But, I'm very sympathetic to people who go that route. I think it's a really effective approach. But I do try to emphasize for people that I talk to about it that it's not meant to be a forever diet.
Right.
You want to just use it for a time period, a purpose to figure out what your triggers are and then move on, because it is pretty limited in terms of nutrient density.
Right.
Just overall
like choices.
Yeah, it's hard.
That's the AIP diet. Is that in your, okay. I saw that. Yeah.
I did do, if people are curious about more, we did do a podcast on an Endurance Planet. If you just search AIP on our website.
AIP. Okay. Endurance Planet. That's great. Yeah. We'll have that in the show notes too. So I was fascinated. I just finished a book called Natural Born Heroes.
Oh yeah.
But Dr. Phil Maffetone had a huge part in the book. The nutrition aspect was him. And I was so fascinated by this guy, and I started doing a little bit of research, but then I was reading and so I just finished like on Sunday. So I'm reading through your story. I'm like, hey, you know Dr. Phil, that's fantastic. So now tell me a little bit about, well, first of all, just personally, I want to know a little bit about him. He seems so fascinating,
He's definitely an interesting man. Like you got to go back and listen to our podcast with him. I just got off, let's see, when we have a show coming out. So it's right now as we're recording, it's November 29th. We have a show coming out with him on November 30th that I recorded last week. This year we've done a monthly show with him, and I actually had both him and Chris on together.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah. Talking about Natural Born Heroes.
Yes.
That was a cool show.
That was already recorded and released?
Yeah, this was, I think, at the beginning of 2016. So
okay. I'll go back to it. Yeah.
And Phil is a unique human. I think not too many people will ever get to that level of, practicing a lifestyle the way he does, because he doesn't care what anybody thinks. He knows his ways, that he feels his best. He sticks to his guns on what he knows is right. So here's a good example. I met him in person for the first time last year at Ironman Arizona. We were both out there for whatever reasons. I was there supporting some athletes, and he's the type of guy that I love to bring snacks, like when I'm traveling, to have my safe foods in case there's nothing available. That's fine. But he brings a whole cooler. Like he's like through the rest of the food from like these restaurants. Like I'm having my stuff, and like I will stick to my food that I'm comfortable with.
Wow.
He's so genuine, and I've had really in-depth talks with him, because I'm like, Phil, I come from a different experience where I have an eating disorder past, so it's different for me. So for me to like indulge on something that's like bad is actually kind of good for me, because it's been part of my healing. For him, he has a different experience. So for him, it's like, no, do not have the cake, do not have the crap, like stick to clean eating. And for him, it's, a pretty low carb approach. And he doesn't push low carb keto, but that's where a lot of his people tend to go. And I have mixed feelings on that, because I've seen the dark sides, the bad sides of what can happen with too low carb and keto approaches. So, I think he and I are a great combination, because we bring two fresh perspectives. But at the end of the day, he's brilliant. Like there's just no one like him. And what he's done for creating healthy athletes, like I don't think any other coach has done that. And with the math method, I mean, I implement that with every single athlete I work with. At some point, they're doing something math oriented, even if it's like regular math tests. And so he really, and it confuses people, because he likes to make your brain work. So he doesn't give you a template. He doesn't give you all the answers. He wants you to kind of figure it out for yourself and your own journey. And he leaves it really vague. And that drives people nuts, because you just want like the answers. So half of Endurance Planet is, answering people's questions on like math training and stuff. But it's great, because think about it. Like, we don't want to just like feed people like diet and workout, because that's missing the ability to teach people to do what their bodies truly need. And we're all different in some way.
We're unique.
So that's why Phil's great. I mean, he's been a great mentor, colleague, So,
he's fascinating. Well, the crazy thing, I mean, I can't remember the date, but he was changing some of the top, ultra marathoners they're changing their life really way back before anybody was talking about eating a high fat diet. And for endurance training, people, that was completely taboo.
It was Mark Allen in the Ironman world. I think even Paula Newby Fraser, I think she kind of dabbled with it a little bit too. And then in the ultra world, it was Stu Middleman that he really helped. And so again, I think we need to be careful with it though. Like if you are a high training, high performing endurance athlete, at some point you're going to need to have carb refuels. Right. So it can't be all low carb all the time. Right. That's just going to cause hormones and performance to tank eventually. But if you do it strategically where you're healthy, then it can actually be the most beautiful synergy of things. Yeah.
That's a great lead into our question. What are, in two parts, actually, you personally, just in normal life, like what are some of the key principles for you to stay healthy? And then, and this may be overlapping, but also in performance, like the key principles for that. So.
Yeah. I think like through all my years, I've sort of been an N=1 experiment. And whether that was right or wrong in the moment, that's kind of how I was. And, I did things right a lot of times, and I also did things stupidly a lot of times, but I've learned a lot of lessons. So I think the biggest thing is that, whatever my experience is, I can't just like transpose that onto somebody else. Like it has to be the individual approach to some degree. But what I have found is that extremes don't tend to work. Like those are the things that kind of screw you over. And what the problem I think is in mainstream these days is that there are a lot of extreme approaches, the keto approach, the minimalist training for ultra endurance events, where and then you get like one or two people for whom it's working. And then all of a sudden it blows up into this like greatest thing since sliced bread or gluten-free sliced bread, And I think for me, what I've found that's working best these days and in my journey of like bridging that ability to be healthy and perform well is moderation. But the problem is moderation isn't sexy. Like no one like wants to sell moderation.
Put it in a program.
No, it's not. It doesn't really appeal to the masses. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what seems to work best. Right. But, because I see people get so wrapped up in a diet mentality or like a one way or the highway, like kind of training mentality and they lose sight of themselves. So I think that's, it's a huge thing. It's just, really being true to yourself and then also not buying into too many extremes. And all the while, like another big thing is a positive mindset. I think something that drugged me down for a long time was just letting these ideas that I'm too busy or, being self-critical or whatever it was, this drive for perfection also being the same thing as like always beating myself down when I wasn't perfect to my standards, letting go of a lot of that stuff and just learning to love yourself a little bit more, accept yourself a little bit more. And I always say to people, the best diet in the world won't work if you're sitting there stressed out as hell about what you're eating. You have to be at peace with yourself. You have to be able to slip into a parasympathetic state and not constantly be in this fight or fight stress mode. Right.
Because that state leads to so many different issues, health issues, just mental issues. You have to be able to, you have to do it. Like you say, you have to be at peace with yourself. You have to be able to get to that point. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, that leads me to my last question. We talked about, and I know you have so much knowledge. We could talk for hours. We talked about this before. How do I fit all your stuff into a small little time? But just to boil it down, you're going to leave. If somebody's listening and they want, they want to take away something, but a lot of times we get overwhelmed, even in a short podcast or show, we get overwhelmed with the information we got. We heard about AIP, MAF, all these different things. But if you were to give advice, one piece of advice, like to somebody that wants to just be healthier, where would you start?
Avoid the internet. No, I'm just kidding. It's so overwhelming. You're right, though. And I think that's a big source. It's obviously a beautiful thing that we have the internet and all this wealth of information at our fingertips. But I hear this all the time. I'm so overwhelmed. How do I do strength training? Because there's 20 people telling me to do it 20 different ways. Well, first, I think it gets back to this idea of mindset. Like, first of all, I see a lot of people this day and age feeding themselves negative thoughts, and they're not able to, even if I always say, like, fake it if you make it, but you need to feed yourself the positive story. A good friend of mine, Travis Macy, wrote a book on this, The Ultra Mindset, and he talked about a lot. Just this idea that we have this tendency to want to focus on the negatives. And so I think a lot of it starts with just making sure that you're taken care of and you're feeding, you have a positive outlook on your well-being. And then from there, we're living in a very crazy time, and it's easy to get so busy and overwhelmed. But if we constantly tell ourselves we're busy and overwhelmed, that's just feeding the problem. So you need to at least say, well, you know what, I have a lot of things going on, but I kind of want to be doing these things, and it's fun, and it's not defined as busy. So, if you're wanting to look at the AIP, okay, so maybe you're not necessarily doing that for the most fun reasons if you're trying to heal autoimmune condition, but you can at least look at it as an opportunity to find new things to eat for breakfast or try new recipes. So, finding the silver lining, or like if you're looking to go through things that we've talked about in this podcast, it's a self-education. It's a continuing education, and look at it from the positive light rather than feeling like overwhelmed and like to the point where you just give up because you just like, I can't even deal with all the information that's thrown at me right now. What I've always done, I'm very into research and reading a lot of journals and, across the board these days. Functional health oriented and stuff, but it's just one day at a time. Like journals can be super, super in depth, and it can be intimidating. But if you just like break it down, like I always like to use it as an analogy, like you can just go into the discussions section and you get like the big picture right there. And then like, as you want to get more in depth, you go into the other sections of the journal. And so I think if we just kind of break things down, like simplify a little bit, and then like, whatever we want to pursue, then you can get more in depth as you need to. Just staying away from this idea that we're overwhelmed and busy all the time is super important.
Yeah. And it starts for you really start with that mindset of understanding all that. That's where you have to bounce from.
It's funny because I'm not like a huge biohacker person, although I guess technically I do, go into that world. I just got back from Dave Asprey's Bulletproof Conference a month or two ago, and it was great, and I loved it, and it was super fun, and I'm so glad I went. But at the same time, like the things I'm talking about right now, setting the right positive mindset and making sure that you're not overwhelmed in your daily life, those are the kind of things that are going to help you sleep better at the end of the day. Just taking a drug to like ease your mind for you it's a Band-Aid. It's not solving the problem. So these are the ways we want to live better, is starting from a natural approach on what we need most. And sometimes what we need most aren't necessarily things we want to do, but we need to do them anyways, So Absolutely.
Well, Tawnee, this was awesome. I'm glad that we got to connect and you got to share more about what you do, your story. And, I want to encourage anybody that wants to reach out to Tawnee, that CoachTawnee.com is the best place. There's a lot of places you can find her, but that's the best place to reach out to her. If you have any more questions, I would really encourage you to check out Endurance Planet too, the podcast. It's fantastic. I'm right after this show, I'm going to jump on and listen to a few of those episodes with Dr. Phil and some more, I'm sure, because I love what you've been telling us. But thank you so much for your time today. You were fantastic.
Oh, you bet. It's been a total pleasure, and I hope people learn something new.
I'm sure I did, so I'm sure they will too.
Good. Well, thanks, Greg. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.